Nestled between rolling green hills and a sparkling blue river stood the village of Maple Hollow, a peaceful American-style village where families worked hard and lived simply. The wooden houses had wide porches with rocking chairs, and gardens bloomed with tulips and sunflowers in the summer breeze. Children laughed as they chased butterflies in the meadows, while men chopped wood and women baked pies whose sweet smell carried through the streets. Life seemed safe, almost perfect. But in Maple Hollow lived a woman named Miss Eleanor, who ran the little herb shop near the old watermill. To everyone, she was kind and helpful, always offering healing teas for colds and poultices for sprains. Yet behind her gentle smile and warm voice lay a terrible secret. Miss Eleanor was not who she seemed. Her true name was Morgana, a wicked witch who had disguised herself to live unnoticed among the villagers. By day, she was the trusted healer, but by night, she transformed into her dreadful self, prowling the village with eyes that glowed red in the darkness. Her hunger for dark power grew stronger with each passing moon, and she longed for something terrible, the innocence of children. When the morning sun rose over Maple Hollow, Morgana wore her disguise like a cloak. She brushed her long gray hair into a neat bun, tied her apron, and welcomed villagers into her shop with a smile. She brewed teas for tired farmers, gave ointments to children with scrapes, and spoke with the soothing voice of a friend. Nobody doubted her kindness. In fact, many mothers trusted her so much that they left their little ones with her while running errands, never knowing the danger their children were in. Morgana's shop smelled of herbs, lavender, and peppermint by day, but when the doors closed and the lamps dimmed, the fragrance changed. The scent of burning candles, bitter smoke, and strange powders filled the air. Beneath her shop, hidden behind a secret wooden door in the floor, Morgana kept a dark cellar. In it were cages lined with iron bars and twisted roots. Already, she had begun her wicked work, luring away children under the cover of night. Each time a child disappeared, the villagers cried and searched the fields, but Miss Eleanor was always the first to comfort them. None suspected that the woman who held their hands in grief was the very witch stealing their joy away. The peace of Maple Hollow began to crack when little Peter, the blacksmith's son, vanished one summer night. His parents had tucked him into bed after supper, but when morning came, his bed was empty, and the windows stood wide open. The villagers searched the meadows, the river banks, and even the woods, but Peter was gone without a trace. Days later, Clara, the baker's daughter, disappeared while gathering berries behind her family's shop. Her basket was found overturned, the fruit scattered on the ground as though she had been snatched away in a hurry. Fear swept through Maple Hollow, and parents clutched their children tightly. Morgana, still disguised as Miss Eleanor, was quick to offer comfort. She brewed calming teas for the weeping mothers and promised she would pray for the children's safe return. No one suspected that at night, she crept into her hidden cellar, where Peter and Clara sat shivering in their cages, staring out through iron bars. Their small cries echoed in the darkness, but Morgana's cruel heart only grew colder as she whispered spells, preparing them for her wicked sacrifice. Deep beneath her herb shop, Morgana's lair was lit by green fire that flickered from her bubbling cauldron. The shelves were lined with bottles of strange powders, jars filled with crawling insects, and skulls that grinned in the candlelight. She walked slowly past the cages, her eyes glowing like embers as she studied the frightened children. "Soon," she whispered, her voice sharp as a knife, "your innocence will give me power beyond all I have dreamed." She mixed her potions, chanting spells that filled the air with smoke so thick that the children coughed and cried. Above the ground, the village still saw her as the gentle healer, but here in the cellar, she was her true self, Morgana the witch. Her plan was simple but evil. Capture 10 children before the harvest moon and use them in a sacrifice that would make her young and strong forever. She already had 2, and she hungered for more. The cages rattled as the children begged to go home, but Morgana only laughed, her cackles echoing against the stone walls. As the disappearances grew, fear settled over Maple Hollow like a heavy blanket. Parents no longer let their children play by the river or chase fireflies in the meadow. Doors were locked early, and candles burned late into the night. In the marketplace, villagers whispered about shadows moving in the woods, about strange lights glowing near the old mill, and about voices that seemed to call from nowhere. Some claimed it was wolves, others blamed bandits. But one man, Marcus the blacksmith, raised his deep voice and said, "This is no man's doing, it is dark magic." His words unsettled the crowd, but few believed him. Only one person listened closely, David Strongheart, the village's bravest warrior. Tall and broad-shouldered, with arms hardened from training, David carried a heart full of courage. He had fought bears in the forest and protected the village from wild beasts before. Now, as he watched the fear in the eyes of the children, David knew he could not ignore the whispers. Something evil was at work in Maple Hollow, and he would be the one to uncover it. David Strongheart began his search quietly. At night, while the rest of the village slept, he walked the dirt roads with his lantern, watching the shadows, listening for sounds that didn't belong. He noticed that the disappearances always happened when the moon was full and bright, as if someone waited for that light to guide them. He also noticed that Miss Eleanor, the healer, was always nearby when families cried out in grief, her calm words sounding too perfect, her presence too steady. She is either the kindest soul I've ever known, David thought, or she is hiding something darker than we can imagine. He started watching her shop carefully, pretending to buy herbs during the day while keeping an eye on her movements at night. Once, he swore he saw smoke rising from her chimney long after midnight, even though no light showed in her windows. His suspicion grew, but without proof, he knew the villagers would never believe him. So David vowed to follow the trail himself and uncover the truth with his own eyes. One night, under a sky filled with stars, David strapped his sword to his side and set off toward the woods behind Miss Eleanor's shop. He moved silently, every sense alert as he followed faint footprints in the dirt, small ones that belonged to children. The tracks led deeper into the trees, where the air grew colder and the moonlight barely touched the ground. Owls hooted, and branches cracked under his boots as he pressed on. Soon, he spotted something strange, pieces of red ribbon tied to branches, glowing faintly as if touched by magic. He reached for one, and it burned cold in his hand. "Witchcraft," David muttered, his jaw tightening. He followed the ribbons until he came to a twisted oak tree larger than any he had ever seen. At its roots was a crooked wooden door, half hidden by vines. A faint green light pulsed from beneath it. David's heart pounded, but he gripped his sword and whispered, "If the children are here, I will bring them home." Slowly, he pushed the door open and stepped inside, not knowing that Morgana was waiting for him. David stepped into the crooked doorway under the oak tree and found himself in a dimly lit passage that smelled of smoke and damp earth. He held his lantern high, and the light flickered across walls covered in strange symbols drawn in chalk. As he moved deeper, he heard the faint sound of crying. Following the noise, he entered a wide underground chamber, and what he saw froze him in place. Cages lined the walls, and inside them were children, thin, pale, and trembling. Their little eyes widened at the sight of him, their hands reaching through the bars. "Help us," whispered Clara, the baker's daughter, her voice weak but hopeful. David's chest burned with anger. But before he could step forward, a chilling laugh filled the air. From the shadows emerged Morgana, no longer wearing her disguise as Miss Eleanor. Her silver hair flowed wildly, her eyes glowed red, and her fingers curled like claws. "So, the warrior comes sniffing around," she hissed. "You should have stayed in your bed, David Strongheart." David raised his sword, his voice steady. "Release the children, witch, or you will face the strength of Maple Hollow." Morgana's laughter echoed like thunder. "They are mine," she said, "and soon their innocence will make me more powerful than you could ever dream." Without warning, Morgana raised her hands and hurled a blast of green fire across the chamber. David leapt aside, the flames crashing against the stone wall and leaving it blackened. He swung his sword, and the steel glimmered in the eerie light as it slashed through the air. Morgana moved swiftly, her body twisting like smoke as she dodged. She raised her staff, carved from twisted wood, and slammed it on the ground. The floor shook, and thorny vines burst from the cracks, snaking toward David's legs. With a mighty roar, he sliced through them, but more grew back. The children screamed in their cages, their cries echoing like a chorus of fear. "You are strong," Morgana hissed, "but strength alone cannot break me." David planted his feet firmly and stared her down. "Strength is not all I have," he said. "I have courage, and I have the will to fight for what is right." His words carried across the chamber, giving the children hope. But the witch only snarled, her anger growing. She knew David would not be easy to defeat, and for the first time, she felt a flicker of unease in her dark heart. The battle raged on as Morgana hurled bolts of fire and shadows, while David countered with skillful strikes of his sword. Sparks flew, and the air smelled of burning wood and smoke. Yet despite his bravery, David soon realized he could not win in this place. Her lair was filled with her power, and the children were in danger with every strike. He needed a plan. Pretending to stumble, he let Morgana believe she had the upper hand. She rushed forward, raising her staff high, but David swung his lantern at her face. The glass shattered, and the flame flared brightly, forcing her to stagger back with a scream as smoke filled her eyes. In that moment, David seized the chance to run to the cages. "I will come back for you," he promised the children as he cut the lock of one cage to prove his word. He pulled Clara into his arms, shielding her as he dashed toward the exit. Morgana shrieked in fury, summoning shadows to chase him, but David's long strides carried him through the passage and out into the forest. He knew he could not free them all just yet, but he had seen enough. He had proof that Morgana was the witch, and he would return with a plan to defeat her. Back in Maple Hollow, the villagers gasped when David carried Clara into the square. Her parents rushed to her with tears streaming down their faces, hugging her tightly. The crowd gathered as David told them what he had seen: the cages, the witch, the cellar beneath Miss Eleanor's shop. Many shook their heads in disbelief, unable to accept that their kind healer was truly a monster in disguise. "She has tricked us all," David said firmly. "She hides her evil behind a smile, but I have seen her true form. She has the children, and if we do not act, they will be lost forever." Some villagers trembled with fear, while others shouted angrily, ready to storm her shop at once. But David raised his hand to calm them. "We must be wise," he said. "Morgana is powerful, and we cannot face her blindly. I will lead the fight, but we must prepare, for this battle will test our courage like never before." His words settled the crowd. For the first time, they realized that their hope rested not in numbers but in the bravery of one warrior who refused to give up. The days that followed were filled with preparation. David trained harder than ever, sharpening his sword until it gleamed and practicing until sweat poured down his face. He sought wisdom from Elder Samuel, the oldest man in the village, who told him stories of witches defeated long ago. "Her power is tied to her lair," Samuel explained. "Break her staff, and her spells will weaken. But beware, her tricks will test not only your strength, but also your heart." The villagers, though fearful, offered their help. The blacksmith reforged David's armor, making it strong but light. Mothers prayed, children drew pictures of him as their hero, and fathers placed food in his pack for the journey. Clara, though still shaken, whispered to him, "Please save the others." "I believe you can." David knelt to her level and promised, "I will not rest until they are free." When the harvest moon began to rise, he knew the time had come. With his sword at his side and courage burning in his chest, David set out once more for the twisted oak tree, ready to face Morgana and end her reign of terror forever. The night of the harvest moon painted Maple Hollow in silver light as David Strongheart marched once more into the forest. The villagers watched from the edge of the meadow, their hearts full of both fear and hope. He moved quickly, following the trail of glowing ribbons until he reached the twisted oak tree. The crooked wooden door stood waiting, pulsing with that strange green glow. David placed a hand on its rough surface, whispered a short prayer, and pushed it open. The air inside was even heavier than before, thick with smoke and the stench of burning herbs. As he descended the narrow passage, he heard the sound of chanting. Morgana's voice filled the chamber, her words sharp and cutting, and the children cried softly in fear. When David stepped into the lair, his sword gleamed in the torchlight. Morgana turned slowly to face him, her silver hair floating as if moved by an unseen wind. She smiled, revealing teeth too sharp for a human. "So the hero returns," she purred. "You should have stayed in your safe little village." David pointed his sword at her. "Tonight, your lies end. Tonight, the children go home." The battle was about to begin. Morgana raised her staff high, and a storm of green fire erupted from its tip, swirling around her like a serpent. Shadows crawled up the walls, twisting into shapes of wolves and snakes that lunged at David. He swung his sword with fierce strength, cutting through the illusions, but every step closer to Morgana felt heavier, as though the air itself was pressing him down. The witch laughed, her voice echoing in the cavern. "You cannot fight me here, warrior. This place is mine. Every stone, every flame, every breath obeys me." She slammed her staff against the ground, and cracks opened in the floor. Flames burst upward, nearly scorching his boots. But David pressed forward, muscles straining, sweat pouring down his face. He thought of Peter, Clara, and all the children who still cried behind those cages. His heart thundered with one thought: I cannot fail them. Summoning all his strength, he roared and drove his sword through a wall of fire, forcing Morgana back a step. For the first time, her grin wavered, and David knew she could be beaten. The clash between warrior and witch shook the lair. Sparks flew each time David's sword struck against Morgana's staff. Her magic lashed out, wrapping vines around his arms, but with a mighty pull, he tore free, swinging his blade to sever the thorny grip. The children pressed against their cages, watching with wide, tear-filled eyes, whispering, "Come on, David, you can do it." Their hope became his strength. Remembering Elder Samuel's words, David focused not on Morgana herself but on her staff. Each strike grew sharper, each movement faster, until his blade rang against the twisted wood again and again. Morgana screamed, pouring all her power into one final spell, lightning crackling from her hands. With a cry that shook the cavern, David raised his sword high and brought it down with all his might. The blade met the staff with a blinding flash. Crack! The staff split in two, shattering with a scream so loud the cavern trembled. Morgana staggered back, clutching her chest as her magic bled away. The green flames flickered and died, the shadows crumbled into dust, and her once proud figure shrank, weaker, smaller. "No!" she shrieked. "This cannot be." But David stood tall, his sword gleaming, and for the first time, the witch looked afraid. The moment her staff broke, Morgana's power began to unravel like a torn cloth. The walls of the lair shook, dust raining down from the ceiling as her spells collapsed. She clawed at the air, her red eyes blazing with fury. "You fool!" she spat. "If I fall, I will drag you with me." She raised her trembling hands, trying to summon one last spell, but nothing came. Her magic had left her. David strode forward, seizing the chains of the cages and tearing them open with his mighty strength. One by one, the children stumbled out, rushing to his side. He placed himself between them and the witch, his broad shoulders like a shield. Morgana screamed, lunging at him, but she was weak, her body frail without her staff. With one swift move, David knocked her to the ground. She lay there, gasping, her disguise of Miss Eleanor flickering back and forth, one moment the kindly healer, the next the hideous witch. The children stared in shock, finally seeing the truth of who had betrayed them. "It's her," Peter whispered. "It was her all along." Morgana's voice grew faint as she hissed, "This is not the end," but her body collapsed into ash, scattering across the stone floor. The lair fell silent, and for the first time in many moons, hope filled the air. The witch was defeated. The ground shook as Morgana's ashes scattered, and the twisted oak groaned like it was alive. Cracks split the walls, and stones began to fall from the ceiling. The children screamed and clung to David's arms. "Stay close to me," he shouted, guiding them toward the passageway. He lifted the smallest children onto his shoulders and carried others in his strong arms while the older ones held onto his belt so no one would be left behind. The once glowing ribbons now turned to ash, vanishing into the air. The crooked wooden door ahead began to slam shut as if the lair itself wanted to trap them forever. With a final burst of strength, David leapt forward, pushing the children out first, and then rolled through just as the door slammed behind him with a thunderous crash. The twisted oak shuddered, its bark splitting as green smoke hissed into the night air. Then, with a great groan, the tree split down the middle and fell silent. The evil that had haunted Maple Hollow was gone. David looked around at the children huddled in the moonlight, trembling but alive. "You are safe now," he told them, his voice steady. "You are going home." The journey back through the forest was long, but David never faltered. He carried 2 children in his arms, led 3 by the hand, and urged the others to keep walking, whispering words of courage. The children, though weak, trusted him fully. When they finally reached the edge of Maple Hollow, lanterns flickered in the distance, and voices could be heard calling in the night. Suddenly, the villagers spotted them, and cries of joy filled the air. Mothers rushed forward, tears streaming down their faces as they scooped their children into their arms. Fathers knelt to embrace their sons and daughters, unable to speak from the weight of relief. The whole village gathered, their eyes wide as David stood tall in the center, his sword still in hand, the children safe around him. "It was Miss Eleanor," David announced, his voice carrying across the crowd. Gasps of shock rang out, for now the truth was undeniable. The kind healer they had trusted had been Morgana the witch all along. The villagers bowed their heads in shame for being deceived, but their grief quickly turned to gratitude as they looked at David. Without his bravery, their children would have been lost forever. In the days that followed, Maple Hollow began to heal. The blacksmith repaired the homes and shops that had been damaged by Morgana's wicked magic, while the baker gave out free loaves of bread to celebrate the children's return. The church bell rang each morning, not in sorrow, but in thanksgiving. David Strongheart was honored as the village's greatest hero. The children, once shaken and afraid, slowly began to laugh again, running through the fields with their friends. Yet no one ever forgot the lesson they had learned, that evil can sometimes hide behind the face of kindness, and that courage is needed to uncover the truth. A new oak tree was planted in the village square to symbolize life and hope, and beneath it the children played, free at last from fear. David, though honored, remained humble. He spent his days training others to be strong and teaching the boys and girls of Maple Hollow how to be brave, reminding them that true strength comes not from the body alone but from the heart. Years passed, and the tale of Morgana the witch and David Strongheart the warrior became the most cherished story in Maple Hollow. Parents told it by candlelight, reminding their children that evil can sometimes hide behind a kind smile, but courage and goodness will always be stronger than any dark magic. David, now older with silver in his hair, remained humble, always saying, "True courage is not about being fearless, it is about protecting others, even when you are afraid." In the center of the village, a mighty oak tree grew where children played and laughed freely, a living symbol that light had triumphed over darkness. The story of David Strongheart was no longer just a memory, it was a lesson of hope, bravery, and love that would never fade. And now it's your turn. If you enjoyed this story, tell me in the comments. What part of David's bravery inspired you the most? Do you think you could have been as courageous if you lived in Maple Hollow? Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story so more people can join in our adventures. Your support helps keep these stories alive.